The approval of a request by the police department to apply for the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant. That's the JAG grant that comes out every year. In the past, it's been an amount of $24,500, and that's the amount that's reflected inside the memo. But the actual amount is $50,000 as the cover letter states. And so the police department will be applying for this non-matching grant, and they plan to purchase 800 megahertz police radios to replace the existing dated, not computers, but radios. And so this is 100% funded and no matching, no match required by the city. So that's item B2.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. I did notice that the amounts were different. I did have a question on that. If it's a federal grant, why are we being reimbursed to the state?
It's a great question that maybe Chief Falls could answer for me.
While Chief Falls up there, we're still out in the normal city council meeting on June 2nd, right?
Correct. June 2nd is still in play. It's the
So June 2nd, June 1st.
Regular meeting, and then, yeah. But there will be no workshop on the 16th.
Good evening.
Good evening.
To answer the question, it is a federal grant, but it's governed through the Governor's Crime Commission, which is a state entity.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on our two items on the consent agenda? Did you have any questions, Jake?
No, I think for this item and for C2,
For V1 and V2?
The consent agenda.
so the next agenda item, I think, too, is a grant request, isn't it? I
Uh,
just wondered procedurally, like,
yeah.
do the departments have to come before council? I mean, obviously they do in the current procedures, but to ask for permission to apply for grants, or is it kind of a two-part request? Like they're asking permission to apply for the grant and to then use those funds if they're granted, if they're given the grant, for the allocated purpose.
Right, yep, there's like a two-step process, and that's part of the grant policy is that the department heads will ask to apply first. You get permission to apply for a grant, and then once we receive the award of the grant, we bring that back to council to state that we've been awarded the grant and that we could receive those funds.
So they would have to come back if they're awarded the grant to then use those funds for the stated purpose.
Correct.
I'm just wondering if there's maybe not a step there that we could, I mean, we're always encouraging our departments to look at whatever grants they may be, eligible for. I mean, I know we've encouraged them to do that. I'm wondering if that's just something maybe in the future. I don't know if that's something we have the latitude to change, but like, I don't know why they should need our permission to.
Well, I think, in this case, maybe not, there's no match, but if there's a match, like with the one we're going to hear about with Safe Streets for All, potentially fairly significant match, I think we should,
Maybe if there's no match required, I mean, if it still has to come to us at the end for the award, I mean, is that something we could maybe kick administrative if it has no match tied to it?
We could look to change the policy. The policy I created and presented to you all, that's an approved policy, so we get going to make a change, and we can make that change.
Does
and
it
bring
make
it
it
back.
easier for y'all in those instances? I mean,
That's what I was-
about the non-match?
I
Or does it really even?
I don't think it's like necessarily hard to do this process.
Yeah.
For me.
I mean, I think you can put them all on consent, because obviously, if there's no match, why wouldn't we want, hey, it's
Free money.
free money?
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think that's,
For the Safe Streets for All, it's a little more intense and
Yes.
some discussion needs to occur. That's why we left it on the, just like.
well, I think anytime there's a match, we should
Yeah.
probably talk about
Because
it.
there's obligations that come with that.
Right.
We have to pay a certain X amount or whatnot.
So we leaving it as is, or?
Yeah, I didn't know. I mean, doesn't sound like it's more or less work either way.
Any further questions on these two items? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion made by Alex, seconded by Charlie. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda is approved. That brings us to item C1, discuss and consider approval of a request to apply for the fiscal year 25 U.S. Department of Transportation Safe Streets and Roads for All SS4A grant. Who will be presenting this?
Yes, this is Reagan. Reagan will be presenting.
Tem. Yes, I'm actually going to turn things over to Captain Black to kick us off, but we're looking forward to talking with you tonight about the Safe Streets for All grant opportunity and some of the opportunities it'll present to our city.
Good evening, Council, Mayor Pro Tem. Like Reagan said, I'm gonna briefly go over some Vision Zero stuff that we've done this past year, just as a complete recap. And then I'll turn it over to Reagan to kind of dive into the actual grant and what the money will be used for and things like that. So discussion is ended. Like I said, I'll go over the recap of Vision Zero, the purpose of it, the implementation efforts that we've done since October of 23, and then she'll dive into the grant overview. So the recap, Live Vision Zero in Belmont, we've had a little over 3,000 accidents from June 2019 to May 2024 that resulted in 580 minor injuries, 11 fatalities, and 21 serious injuries. Since May 2024, we've also had another fatality that happened on the interstate a few weeks ago. So those numbers obviously just are going up. So from 2019 to current, we've had 36 pedestrian and bicyclists that were involved in traffic accidents. And of 25 pedestrians involved in traffic accidents, 6 pedestrians were killed and 5 sustained serious injuries. That's from 2019. So our Vision Zero statement that we have adopted is, as a community, it's our responsibility to eliminate traffic deaths for all who share City of Belmont streets by 2030. That's kind of our goal. And how we're obtaining that, or what we're kind of focusing on, is we have come up with 3 emphasis areas or focus areas that actually help us identify our high injury network, our bad streets or bad intersections. We kind of use this as a guide to help us identify these awful streets. So the first focus area, emphasis areas, is protecting the vulnerable and road users. So that would include pedestrians and cyclists, older and younger drivers, which I have a younger driver just as a few weeks ago. So, sensitive land uses, like, areas around parks and our schools, lighting and wayfinding, and safe access for all. Emphasis area number 2, or focus area number 2, is driver alertness and accountability. So we're trying to address distracted driving and DUIs, obviously, or DWIs. And at the PD, we've actually addressed this as the police department. Our driving in service mandated this year was actually on distracted driving. So as a city, we're practicing what we're preaching, in other words. Promoting culture of safety and accountability among drivers, and then targeted enforcement and traffic calming devices. And so one of the ways we're trying to do that is, obviously through this grant with the funding, we're looking at purchasing software. The software we're looking at is it's called Urban SDK software. And kind of what it does, it allows us to, in real time, monitor traffic data. So we're able to go back, literally, what took us a year, all the data that was in our action plan that we adopted, that took us a year to gather, we're pretty much able to do that in about a week, just because of the algorithms and how it collects the data through this software. So it's going to eliminate a lot of manpower hours, a lot of time that took us to collect all that data, just going to kind of streamline it through this Urban SDK software. So the emphasis area number 3 is reducing intersection conflicts, improving signal timing and phasing, and improving pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure at signalized intersections. So those 3 focus areas kind of what guide us through our action plan. So our high injury network, we've identified the 15 most dangerous road segments and the 15 most dangerous intersections in Belmont. And so our road segments account for 60% of all crashes. Our fatality and severe crashes, 59% were on road segments. And intersections, it was 21% of all crashes and 6% of fatal or severe crashes. That's kind of our high injury network. So our implementation, kind of what we've done since adopting the Vision Zero, the active implementations we've done is we, as a city, continue to have bike safety programming and education for children through our Safe Kids program, which some of y'all saw the Safe Kids trailer that we had our walk to school day. We organized a walk to school day just a month ago. That was a huge success. We had a really good turnout for that. We continue quarterly meetings with NCDOT, Gaston, Cleveland, Lincoln Metropolitan Organization, and Gaston County Transportation Projects. We participate in Governor's Highway Safety Program campaigns. One is actually going on right now. It's the Click It or Ticket Memorial Day campaign that they're running. We've launched our advisory board that has helped us put together the action plan. That advisory board obviously consists of citizens in Belmont, business owners, stakeholders on that board. We've obviously had staff members from each department that serve as the coordinators, participate actively in statewide Vision Zero and Leadership Institute, which we are, as a city, going in a couple weeks. Seek funding for pilot programs or projects, programs, and capital improvements through federal, state, and local sources. So preparing for the implementation, we're trying to create a public-facing Vision Zero webpage and crash dashboard on the city's website so citizens have a place to go to figure out, hey, these are the segments we're looking to improve, here's why, here's the data to back that up. Encourage residents and visitors to commit to a Vision Zero pledge. I think if everybody can get on board with our goal, it's just going to make the city safer. Implementation highlight, we've had obviously the advisory board, the Vision Zero car, which was unveiled at the Walk to School event. It is actually assigned to one of our downtown officers, so it's out on the street every day, Monday through Friday. So it can be seen, bring awareness to what we're trying to do, and it's in the downtown area. Belmont Central Elementary Walk to School Day, and the Vision Zero Leadership Institute. So those are all the community engagement projects that we're involved in. And then our advisory board, kind of touched on, comprised of diverse community. Its purpose during the plan development was provide input on the vision, priorities, and strategies of the action plan. And then since the plan adoption, we still meet quarterly with that advisory group to kind of give them updates, what we're looking to do on the implementation side, and then get their feedback from them from out in the community. There's our Vision Zero car and our logo that we came up with. And then our Walk to School Day was held on April 4th. We had over 200 community members. Easily it was over 200 community members. And then pilot event engaged the interest and best practices for community-wide Walk to School Day in October. Is what we're looking to do. Since it was such a huge success, trying to do another one in October and make those kind of annually to continue. And then the Vision Zero related engagement. And then lastly, the Leadership Institute that we'll be attending in a couple of weeks. Six people from Belmont, that from the Planning Department, Police Department, Fire Department, Public Works, an advisory group. There's a Zoom meeting, I believe, at the end of the month, right? Yeah. And then we have an in-person in June. Unfortunately, it's in Chapel Hill. Instead of Raleigh.
Could there be any better place?
But no, we'll attend that. It's a 2-day event, in-person training that will get some very good information, very good networking once we go there. So we're kind of looking forward to that. We've applied for a Vision Zero award, which we'll find out if we got the award at that institute. So I don't think there's many communities that put together an action plan in a year's time. We're slowly finding out that usually takes about 2 to 3 years to put together. We did it in a year, so hopefully we can get an award. So. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reagan to kind of dive into the grant money.
Question, so once you get like the website up and the dashboard with like all the crash data and all that, I'm assuming there's gonna be a plan to kind of push that out to residents.
Yes. Yeah, that's literally the goal, to do that, so.
Will this also be the accepted format for like the state when they're reviewing crash data and stuff like that as well? Because I know when we talk about road improvements at the MPO level, we always talk about like safety, where do we have a lot of high collisions, and then they go back to the crash data. Is this something that can be utilized by the state as well?
Yes.
When they're reviewing that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It It's actually all the same data. So the
Right.
state uses the data that's reported by our local officers
Right.
in their data set. So we pull essentially from the same source for our data.
Okay, awesome.
Are you having good participation in the advisory board from citizens?
Yes, we've got, from Gaston County Transportation, Gaston County Schools, we've got several citizens,
Carolina Thread Trail.
yeah, Carolina Thread Trail is heavily involved, so we've got a lot of good stakeholders and residents that are involved, and actually giving us really good feedback. Is one of the citizens going to?
Yes.
Yeah, so we even have, we have a couple actually going to the Vision Zero Institute in June, so, really good participation with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as Captain Black mentioned, part of our focus since October has been on community engagement and building awareness and understanding about Vision Zero. And another big goal of ours since y'all approved the plan in October has been finding funding opportunities to implement the capital projects and the strategies that we adopted as part of that plan. So one of those, you might recall in November, a couple months ago, I presented to you all on the status of some of our ongoing trail projects. And we talked about potential funding opportunities for Abbey Creek Greenway and Belmont Rail Trail. And council at that time gave the directive to pursue, at the time it was RAISE funding. With the new administration, it's build funding, but it's all the same grant program. But council gave direction to pursue that funding opportunity to implement some of these local projects. We worked with Kimley Horn to develop our grant application, and after chatting with them, we determined that Abbey Creek Greenway was going to be the best fit for the build grant because it was a little further along in its design. So we applied for $3.7 million in funding from USDOT through the build grant to construct the remainder of the Abbey Creek Greenway. This project is a really important Vision Zero implementation piece because it provides a separated pedestrian and bicycle alternative to our #1 most dangerous high injury network corridor, which is Wilkinson Boulevard, where we've seen the most fatal and severe crashes, and also the most crashes aside from I-85. We actually received 13 letters of support from our partners around the community and across the greater region, so we're really excited about that and having that support from all of our partners. And we haven't heard yet on the status of that application, but we anticipate hearing by the end of the fiscal year. So hopefully here in the next month or two, we'll have some good news to share with y'all about that.
Can you go back for a second? Who are
Sure.
the partners, just so I understand?
So we got letters of support from if I remember off the top of my head, the Downtown Belmont Development Association, Catawba Riverkeeper, Carolina Thread Trail, Central Line Council of Governments, the Gaston Cleveland Lincoln MPO, Gaston County Travel, Tourism, and Recreation, as well as Gaston County Public Health, the Gaston Business Association, several of our representatives, the Belmont Police Department, of course, and I think several others, but yeah.
No, I was just curious. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, it's gonna take some
Mhm.
heavy supporters, right?
Absolutely.
Big people up there.
Yeah, for sure. And we've reached back out to many of the same partners and are, in the process of reaching back out to many of those same folks to support our Safe Streets for All application, which is really why we're here this evening and what we'd like to talk about. So you may remember that in November when we talked about trail funding, we also touched on the Safe Streets for All grant as a funding opportunity for trails and Vision Zero projects, and so we're going to discuss that in detail tonight. So that grant was opened for applications at the end of March, and they opened a 90-day application window. So the applications are due by the end of June 26th. This year. There are two types of funding available. There's a planning and demonstration funding pot, which typically provides smaller awards for communities and regions that are looking to develop a traffic safety action plan. And we have a qualifying safety action plan as of October 2024. As Captain Black mentioned, we did that in-house, which is something you don't see a lot in other communities across the state or even the country. So we're very excited about that, but that actually, we developed that plan in accordance with the Safe Streets for All guidance for action plans, so that we would be eligible this funding cycle for the bigger pot of money, which is the implementation funds. Those are primarily meant for programming, implementing strategies in the Vision Zero action plan, and most notably, they can be used for major capital roadway improvements, right? So major projects. Now, Safe Streets for All does have a local match requirement of 20%. So essentially no more than 80% of the total grant amount can come from federal dollars. But it does provide flexible options in terms of how we can meet that local match requirement, specifically related to how they count in-kind versus cash match. So I'll talk a little bit about that. In-kind contributions, y'all may be familiar with this already, but if you're not, in-kind contributions are essentially putting a dollar amount on the time, the energy, the supplies, and the other resources that it takes to carry out implementation of the grant. So for SS4A, staff salaries count as in-kind, as well as the value of volunteer time, supplies, software. So for example, like the software program that Captain Black was speaking about, that traffic analysis software program, all of those are eligible in-kind contributions, and even the value of capital improvements that are made on related projects that fall under the grant scope, whether the effort is made by the city or not, as long as it takes place during the period of the grant's performance, that's also an eligible in-kind contribution. So for example, if we have a developer that makes a safety improvement on one of our adopted high injury network corridors, it doesn't necessarily have to come out of the city's pocket. If the developer is making that improvement, we can count the value of it as an in-kind contribution.
It could already be committed to outside of the Vision Zero framework as long as it is undertaken within the appropriate time frame.
Exactly. Yep, that's right. So those are in-kind contributions. Cash contributions are more what you typically think of when you think of grant match. So just a straight up cash commitment of a certain amount, whether by the local government, a state entity, private organization, or even a nonprofit. It can come from essentially any source as long as it's not coming from another pot of federal funding. So you can't double count federal funds, but you can essentially count funds from anywhere else. So to kind of fast forward a little bit, our approach is really, we're looking at ways to leverage a number of these different options to come up with a local match amount that will allow us to complete the package of projects that we're hoping to pursue with this grant.
So Regan, do you have to, during the application phase, do you have to kind of put a number and quantify each of those types of contributions as part of the application, or does that come once the grant is actually awarded?
We do generally have to enumerate in the application, this is the total amount we're looking for, and then this is the amount of local match we're providing from certain sources. We don't necessarily, and I'll get into this in a minute or two, but if we're using, let's say, a payment in lieu that's been given to the city already by a developer, it's city funds for the sake of the grant, but it's actually, developer funding that's already committed to a certain intersection or type of improvement. Does that make sense? So we only really have to explain where that funding is coming from to USDOT. It might come to the city from a different source, but if it's coming to USDOT or towards the grant implementation just from the city, that's the level of detail that we need.
But it's also not etched in stone that if we, down the road, something that we anticipated being available is not, or
Yes.
for whatever reason, we decide the local match would be less,
Right.
we're allowed to do that. It's just the scope of the
Yeah.
other 80% would be less.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So essentially at this time, really we're applying for, the maximum that we might receive. We always have the option to reduce it later if one of those match sources isn't available or something else happens.
Might they reduce it in terms of
They may
DOT?
also
So
reduce it.
It's not all or nothing. So we could apply for 22 million and they could give us 15.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep, that's right. So I wanted, before we dive into the financials and kind of those nitty-gritty details, I wanted to talk through the projects that we're hoping to fund and how we came up with our number that we're hoping to apply for. And I will note, these, the concept for our application for this round of Safe Streets for All funding stems from the priority projects that we included and approved in our Vision Zero action plan. We had 10 priority projects that we called out, and a few of those are already funded through efforts like NCDOT's 85 widening, like their replacement of the Catawba River Bridge, but a number of them are unfunded at this point. And so we brought those unfunded projects to our advisory board and our task force and had a really detailed discussion about those remaining unfunded projects and how they should be prioritized. And how we need to, look at those, which ones should be lifted up as we seek funding for implementation. So based on the advisory board and the task force's guidance and input, these 4 packages of projects rose to the top, and really what we heard from folks is that they want to see our students and our children in Belmont able to travel safely to schools, to downtown. We heard a need for safer travel between North Belmont and downtown, and so that's how we arrived at kind of our approach to the grant proposal, which is we're calling Safe Routes to Belmont Schools and Campuses. And so we have 4 packages of projects that fall under that I will very briefly go into. Safe Routes to Page Primary School, this far and away was the biggest priority for our advisory group and our task force. The focus for this project is on Keener Boulevard with some improvements to R.L. Stowe Road and Ewing Drive as well, especially considering the crash that occurred in fall of 2023 involving Amir, who was, he's a 4-year-old, he was 4 years old at the time, and he was involved in a severe collision while trying to cross Keener Boulevard. And through a lot of our engagement in the last several months, we've heard from a lot of parents of Page students that Keener is a major obstacle to allowing their kids to even, think about walking to Page. And especially given that we have so many residential communities just across Keener from that elementary school, we really want to look at ways that we can improve safety for those students and their families. So we're looking at everything from realigning the intersection of Keener and R.L. Stowe to straighten that intersection up a little more and reduce kind of the ability for cars to treat the right turn almost as a slip lane, which can put some of our pedestrians that are in the crosswalks further up Keener at risk. We're looking at, replacing the existing crosswalks with higher visibility crosswalks, exploring a protected crossing for students at Ewing Drive, improving the school crossing signage to get driver attention, and then exploring some other traffic calming measures and other pedestrian improvements on Ewing Drive as you get closer to Page. The second project package is Safe Routes from Downtown to Belmont Abbey College, and this one includes kind of a suite of different elements. We are kind of taking north and south and downtown Main Street, Central Ave, and Belmont Rail Trail, all as one broad north-south corridor from downtown to Belmont Abbey to facilitate that safer access between both Belmont Abbey and the communities in North Belmont and downtown. As we talked about a couple months ago in November when we discussed the rail trail, that project is partially funded already through CMAQ, which is a grant program through the MPO. Excuse me, but it's not fully funded for construction yet. And when we looked at that project for build funding, it was deemed to be not quite as competitive, like I mentioned, because Abbey Creek was a lot further along in their design process. But we heard from Kinley Horn at the time that Safe Streets for All was going to be a much better fit for this project specifically. And so that's a piece of this proposed project package. But there are also several other pieces that for example, came straight from the transportation bond that was considered last fall. So we're looking at a lot of different types of improvements along this entire broad corridor, from pedestrian signals and countdowns at some of our traffic lights to high visibility crosswalks and protected crossings with beacons in and around downtown, to adding sidewalk and filling in gaps, especially along Central Ave, again for a lot of our residential communities that seek to use that corridor, adding some new left turn lanes on Central, and then again constructing the rail trail as part of that.
Hey Reagan, real quick on this one. So
Yeah.
we talked about kind of the funding opportunities. Do we plan to reach out to the Abbey to see if they'd be willing to partner with any type of funding in regards to this grant?
We
When
certainly
get to
can.
that step, I guess, if we're awarded anything, we talk about matching.
Yeah.
Because this is something that directly benefits them. I mean, it benefits us
Yeah.
to promote safety, but this is also something for their college students and such that,
Sure.
To take it one step further, I agree with you. 1, 3, and 4 on your plan is to public schools. This is a private institution.
Sure.
I think the Abbey should be paying for that.
Okay. Yeah, we can certainly explore opportunities to see if they would be willing to partner. I know that they have, partnered with us already on some projects like the I-85 widening and some of those betterments. So I think, it just takes a little more conversation.
I would hope that, maybe a little bit different because those are static, right? That's all about, the design and
Sure.
the entryway. This is more in line with public safety in regards to making sure, just people in general, but also their students
Yeah.
have a safe route, right? So,
Absolutely. I think the other big benefit of this package of projects is we're looking at a lot more safe connectivity between our historic neighborhoods in North Belmont, as well as some of the new residential development that's going in up there that, some of those folks may be affiliated with the Abbey, some may not. But when we think about the barrier that I-85 and Wilkinson pose in our community, right, to getting from North Belmont into downtown, while it's not, I think trailhead for the rail trail right now is proposed to be adjacent to the Belmont Abbey campus. It's also something that's going to be accessible to those residents. So I think absolutely we can reach out and discuss with the Abbey how they might be willing to help support, an application that supports their students and supports those residents. That third project package, safe routes to South Point High School and Belmont Middle School. This is, a hot button that comes up, I think, in most of our conversations, most of my conversations, at least with residents, are always interested in South Point Road and how we're gonna, alleviate the traffic congestion. But another big priority there is making sure our students can navigate that area safely. And so a big focus here is, Nixon Road, adding sidewalks again to some of the newer residential developments that are being developed, adding crossings for students so that they have a little more flexibility in how they get to and from school, adding turn lanes for parents who are turning into and out of the school parking lot so that they're out of the way of traffic and we're reducing the risk of conflicts between those vehicles. At this time, we're mostly taking the Nixon Road improvements to be part of our grant application. As you all know, the South Point Road improvements are currently anticipated to be completed by the Lakeview Farms development, and some of them may or may not be incorporated into our grant application to help kind of bolster our local match. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute or two.
Do the sidewalk improvements on Nixon Road include, I know we've got some gaps in the sidewalking in the newer developments towards the back,
Yeah.
but even up closer to South Point Road, does this include new sidewalks that are missing sort of from, one of the driveways at the back lot of the school to
Yes.
South Point Road? Includes that as well?
Yep, it does.
And hasn't that been on the CIP even?
I don't know if it's on the CIP, it was on the
It was
list
on
of
the
bond
bond,
projects.
for sure.
Okay, yeah, I knew it was in there, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
All
Uh-huh.
right.
Yeah, so the same scope that was included as part of the bond package is what we're looking to accomplish through this project, but with the addition of some more crossing improvements and
Yeah.
other safety improvements.
Okay.
And then finally, safe routes to North Belmont Elementary School. Improvements on Woodlawn in this area have been explored not only for the bond package, but also proposed through the State Transportation Improvement Program, or the STIP, for the last several years. So we know that improvements on Woodlawn are not just a local priority, but a broader priority, even when we look at our MPO region. And Safe Streets for All is a particularly great opportunity to look at improvements in this area, because especially as you get close to North Belmont, you're going in and out of the city's jurisdiction. So seeking federal funding for a project like this allows us to collaborate with the county and coordinate on making those improvements across those jurisdictional borders. So this will include sidewalks and bike lanes on both sides of Woodlawn, from North Belmont Elementary all the way down to Belmont Mount Holly Road. Again, high visibility crosswalks and safer crossings for students and other community members as they navigate Woodlawn. A protected crossing for students specifically at School Street and Boundary Street, and then other traffic calming measures for students and their families during drop-off and pickup on School Street.
Kind of on the same vein, I mean, I think that's an opportunity to talk to the county in regards to financial partnership, particularly through some of the areas, but I almost
Sure.
wonder with the EDC as well, considering that this is a lot of the warehouses and manufacturing that they push, to see whatever funds that they might be able to also help out with. Maybe even they could reach out to some of these distributors, warehouses, and manufacturers to help support this as a kind of public-private partnership.
Yeah, absolutely.
Reagan?
Yeah.
Well, now that we're through the 4 priorities, I have to say I'm a little perplexed with the prioritization.
Okay.
I mean, I respect, everybody that put so much time into this and the studies that were done, and, but kind of to Charlie and Alex's point, I think, if you look at the sheer number, if we're talking about minimizing incidents and the likelihood of where those are most likely to occur, I mean, arguably, South Point High School and Belmont Middle School sees more pedestrian traffic than any of these. By far, it's not even close. But yeah, they're number 3 on the priority list. I'm hoping maybe you can help me understand. I'm wondering if maybe like the connectivity with the Abbey, are you thinking maybe that type of project gives us a better chance of securing this grant, and that's why it receives such high? Because I think there's some gaps in our connectivity right now that we just have to accept. I mean, we have 85, we have 74 that divide us. And maybe eventually we'll get to a point where some of those initiatives we can partner on. But maybe you can shed some light on why that might receive higher priority than, say, some of those other really high pedestrian traffic areas.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will note, and let me go back to our high injury network. All of these projects are projects that are located along or adjacent to those 15 most dangerous road segments and the 15 most dangerous intersections in our community, right? The way that we then prioritized, we included a list of 10 priority projects in our Vision Zero plan, and that was based on projects that were kind of already in development or already underway in one way or another. So either they had already been included in an NCDOT project, like for example, some of the improvements to the Catawba and Wilkinson intersection that are going to be completed as part of the Catawba River Bridge replacement, or potentially they were recommended as part of the pedestrian master plan that was adopted a few years ago, or preliminarily designed and developed as part of the transportation bond. So where we had projects that have already been researched, investigated, and vetted with the community that fell on our high injury network, those are the projects that we put forward in the plan. Like I mentioned before, a couple of those are already funded and already planned to be completed by folks like NCDOT. So for the remainder of those projects, which I think the other ones that were included were improvements to Abbey Plaza, kind of the Park Street, Wilkinson, Hawley Avenue area, sidewalk improvements along Wilkinson Boulevard, and improvements to Pebble Creek and Perfection Ave that were included in the bond package. The 4 that we've shown tonight were the ones that when we engaged, in particular our advisory group, we actually had them rank, those remaining projects. We gave them an opportunity to add to those projects if they felt like there were things missing. So that's kind of how these came forward, and how the rankings were determined. Now I will note, if we, jumping ahead a little bit, if, we need to make tough decisions, for example, about what projects we can fund based on the total grant amount that were awarded by USDOT or something like that, and we need to determine which projects to cut, and council doesn't feel strongly about this ranking, that's a conversation that we certainly can have, potentially at the time of, determining that grant agreement and agreeing to enter into that contract with USDOT. But for the,
So,
yeah,
I'm sorry, to interrupt it.
sure.
If you were awarded this grant and you present it in that priority list, do they also mandate that the funds have to be used in that order, or do you have a
Not
latitude, like you said, you
necessarily. No, we have the flexibility to amend it at a later date. I think the key is that we wouldn't necessarily be able to add other projects to
Sure.
that list unless USDOT, there's a caveat in the contract that talks about if something were to cost less than what we expect, and we're, finding ourselves with a surplus of funds, which I
Happens
think
all
is
the time.
very, yeah, right, it's so likely to happen. But if we were in that situation, USDOT would work with us. If we were awarded, say, 20 million and we used 18 and did everything we wanted to do, they would work with us to figure out what that extra 2 million could go towards. But that's the only caveat. There's no necessarily, there's not a stipulation on USDOT's side that says it needs to be ranked or anything like that. It's more so on our end, just in terms of developing a competitive application and showing kind of that through line of, we've taken these projects from community engagement, we've vetted them again with our advisory group, and this was the, preferred priority and their recommendation to you all, in terms of how we prioritize them for the grant. All right, so getting down to the dollars, and Mayor Pro Tem Heffernan mentioned this number before, but we are proposing a total grant request amount of $22 million. For implementation grants, there's a cap of $25 million. So we are proposing to leverage kind of as much of that as we can. There is a period of performance for the Safe Streets for All grant over 5 years. And so essentially projects need to be completed and those funds need to be expended over the course of 5 years. And that amount would provide, as we break down the budget below, approximately $700,000 for Vision Zero programming and administration over those 5 years, approximately $400,000, a little over that, in low-cost spot improvements on our high injury network, and the bulk of it, the remaining $21.3 million, would fund the 4 project packages that I just described. So the Safe Routes to Page Primary School package is estimated to be about $3.6 million. The Safe Routes from downtown to Belmont Abbey College is estimated to be around 8.4. Safe Routes to South Point High School and Belmont Middle School is estimated at around 2.6. And then the Woodlawn Avenue improvements, Safe Routes to North Belmont Elementary, are estimated at about 6.3.
We couldn't find $3 more million to hit the cap of 25.
Honestly, there's part of me that's just nervous to ask for the full amount, that thinks maybe if we slide in right under, when you price something at $7.99 instead of $8, you think you're getting a deal. So
Look, I get that,
Yeah.
but I think one of the things we got going for us, and I don't think we need to hold back if that's the thing, because we've got the data, we've got the cost estimates. If there's a project we have out there
sure,
and we have the details behind it,
yeah,
we might as well put it in here, because we definitely won't get it if we don't try.
that's
Right.
true.
So if we can go to the full 25 and we've got another project we can throw up on here,
Yeah.
might as well go ahead and do that, because again, we've got the details behind it to support it, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
for an action plan that this would theoretically get approved. So if there's another project, put it on there. Go for the full 25.
Okay.
I agree.
But one thing I think later on in the slides, the potential sources, which is another section here that comes up, is unassigned fund balance, so we've already calculated the amount that's an in-kind match, and so if we have,
Right.
you know, that extra $3 million, you gotta consider that there may be, that we'd have to contribute to.
600,000 more.
Yeah, an
A little
unassigned
bit
fund
more.
balance amount,
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
that amount over a 5-year period, so
That's a
just
great segue.
FYI.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that, what this is gonna mean for the city. The way we went about this is we figured out, especially in terms of in-kind match, and existing or projected budget allocations, what can we reasonably expect that we're gonna contribute in in-kind, and in recurring expenses over the course of this grant, period of performance that would at least get us a baseline, right? Where we're asking of the city, you know, nothing more than our standard kind of operating expenses. So what we've been able to do is calculate out based on, the in-kind match, the value of our staff time for all of our staff members that participate in Vision Zero activities, from task force meetings to the advisory group meetings to putting together presentations like this to doing other community engagement, networking presentations, you name it, Vision Zero administration, community engagement, all of that. And volunteer time, valuing, the contribution from our advisory group members. Over 5 years, we actually are able to get up to about $500,000. And so then across other budget areas, we've projected certain amounts forward from the planned fiscal year 26 budget. So for example, that budget right now includes $5,000 for just Vision Zero materials, supplies, programming. So we assumed that that would carry forward. Of course, all of this is subject to council approval each year through the budget process, but we assumed that would carry forward over 5 years. The FY26 budget also includes grant matching funds that have been requested from the planning department that if we were able to receive this grant, we would put those towards match for this grant opportunity. The software program that Captain Black mentioned earlier, this would be proposed beginning in FY27, so it's not something that's currently in our city budget, but is something that would be considered as part of the regular city budget process. And so council would have the opportunity to learn more about that software program, hear from both planning and police about the benefits that we feel that would bring to our departments, and then evaluate that cost on an annual basis. And then we've also been able to identify several payments in lieu that the city has received for improvements to certain intersections and locations. Notably, those are a payment in lieu from the Del Webb development for improvements to South Main and Central, and a payment in lieu from the Smith Farm development for a sidewalk extension on South Point Road from the Belmont Town Center to that community. Because both of those locations are included in our project packages and on our high injury network, we're able to leverage those payments in lieu. We still have to make improvements using that money within the general vicinity of those locations or those intersections, and ensure that they benefit those developments and reduce the traffic that they are generating. But within reason, we're confident that we can leverage those as part of our baseline local match and incorporate those into these projects.
Could some of the improvements from Lakeview Farms not be included on Southwood, right?
You're reading my book.
Okay.
That's I think 2 slides away.
So that's not the baseline. that's the next step.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so this amount, which is this just over $2 million, is what we're confident that the city can match. A request of 10.1 or so million dollars without any new requests to the unassigned fund balance, without necessarily dipping into funds from the Lakeview Farms project or anything like that. This is just, looking at what we already know we're going to spend. We're going to contribute to Vision Zero programming, to maintaining that program, evaluating our implementation strategies over the next several years in the first place. We anticipate, spending this amount and then being able to leverage it as match. So this is kind of the baseline that we can come back to if needed, if other funding sources to get us the rest of the way of our local match don't come through. So, and with that, I just want to call out a couple of things, and we've talked about a good deal of this already, but that grant award is essentially considered a not-to-exceed amount for USDOT, right? So they're not necessarily going to be expecting to contribute exactly, let's say, $20 million or $15 million, even if we can't come up with, an amount of local match. If we have an amount of local match that's lower than what we anticipated when we applied, they're going to reduce their federal share accordingly, right? So for example, if we apply for 22 million, which requires a local match of 4.4, and then we find we're only able to contribute that baseline amount, we don't have other funds that come through that we can supply, we're able to just reduce, that federal share from what it would be if we were to receive 22 million, which is 17.6, to that, 8.1 million that we would receive if we stuck with this baseline amount of 10.1. So the takeaway really is, even if we're awarded that full proposed amount or more, if we go, let's say for 25 million, we go for that full implementation award, we're not obligated to any specific amount of local match. We can always work within our USDOT at a later date to amend our agreement to reflect the accurate amount of local match if it's lower than what we expect.
Then that would indicate we should go for the 25 if we can amend that, is my opinion on it. And then secondly speaking, maybe we'll get into the Lakeview Farms, but that's a pretty expensive project that would aggregate to quite a bit here. Because really, if you did 25, you only need $5 million. I can say you only need $5 million.
Right.
But you got $2 million right here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would imagine, at least what the Lakeview Farms folks were saying, how much were they saying that project was estimated to be?
They gave us 7 for whatever.
7 million? I mean, is that dollar for dollar that would go to contribute to this, or is there
I
some?
don't think it would be
There's some
that would,
restrictions.
because there's,
It's gotta be specific to
Yeah.
To
pedestrian
safety improvements, exactly. So y'all are reading my mind, and I'm glad that we're all kind of on the same page here. So we're exploring a number of sources to get us, without, again, dipping into any additional city funding, to that 4.4 million that we want for a $22 million grant request. One of those sources is the NCDOT Traffic Safety Unit. I've been able to connect with those folks, and my understanding from them is they actually have matched up to 100% of the local match amount for communities who are seeking action plan funding. So if a community looking to do an action plan has $1 million they're putting forward, NCDOT may put forward another $1 million to get them up to $2 million and double their requested amount. Sure.
well, we know it's been well publicized, the budgetary and monetary issues that
Yes.
NCDOT has had.
Yeah.
Does that still hold true?
It's a great question, and one that I had when I learned about this opportunity, and not being privy to all of the nuances of NCDOT's budget operations, I can't say for certain, but my understanding is that there are funding amounts that are allocated very specifically to different divisions for certain tasks. So the traffic safety unit's funding can't be pulled back into the STIP, which the State Transportation Improvement Program is the bucket that's kind of experiencing that lack of funds right now. So there are restrictions and caveats based on the how the funding was allocated in the first place. So essentially, this funding is tied specifically to road safety planning and traffic safety improvements, and it can't be used for anything else. And so, in effect, it's kind of this pot of money that not many people are aware of. It's not widely publicized as a funding opportunity, but I was able to connect with these folks through some of my former colleagues who are working over at the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization. They received a match of their local funds of $500,000 from NCDOT's Traffic Safety Unit last year for their SS4A application. So that's how I kind of got the contact, but it's been a very much like email the right person and kind of get in touch.
So is that a separate grant request to NCDOT?
It's not a formal grant request. We've submitted kind of just an informal proposal to them that documents the funding or the project packages that we've explained to you all tonight, and called out specifically, they have certain types of countermeasures that their funds are specifically eligible to go towards. So we've called out under each project package the eligible improvements that they could put funding towards. And what we've asked of them is to help us get to 2.5 million with our match. So they're still considering that request. Hopefully I'll have good news on that soon, but we will absolutely have that contribution if they're willing and able to help us out finalized by the time we submit our grant application to the USDOT. So that's one source. Another source that we've touched on already is Lakeview Farms. So it's been mentioned, they've allocated, I think, $7.2 million in traffic safety improvements.
But like lane, according to the eligibility requirements, lane widening isn't
Widening
allowed.
is not an eligible
Yes.
improvement, exactly. Yep, so there are caveats to what can and can't be funded through Safe Streets for All dollars. So that's the key with Lakeview Farms is only certain improvements are able to count. So the cost that they expend making those improvements could be counted as local match, like as an in-kind contribution on our behalf, but not the full amount. And the caveat there, the reason that, we're thinking of this as a hopeful maybe, but not a definite, is because those improvements, as Mayor Pro Tem Heffron mentioned a little while ago, would need to be made during our agreement with USDOT or during our period of performance.
So I figured that, but so if we're thinking about this, or maybe we're gonna talk about this from a time perspective, but if this is due at the end of June, when is the decision made?
The decision made by USDOT. They'll get back to us by the end of August.
By the end of August,
Mhm.
and then,
Yeah. Or at least that's what they've shared so far.
Traffic signal.
Well, the question was whether the traffic improvements at Armstrong and South Point Road would count.
They could potentially count. We may be able to count them, but we'll need to just take a look back and confirm that those would be able to be part of our kind of high injury network package. That's the key, is it has to relate directly to our Vision Zero network.
Can you restate the stipulation about the Lakeview Farms development team and needing to agree to?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, essentially, we would need to confirm with the development team that they would be willing and able to wait on making the eligible improvements only until we are under contract with USDOT. So essentially, and I've listed out a couple examples on the slide, but the traffic signal at McKee Farm and Stowe Road in South Point, the new sidewalk connector between Belmont Town Center and Smith Farm, all of the crossing improvements along that portion of South Point Road that's getting widened. The widening itself would not be eligible, but all of those improvements would be.
Well, those most likely wouldn't be made, these eligible improvements likely wouldn't be made until the widening's
Until
done anyway.
after
So
the
it shouldn't be a
widening.
conflict there, right?
Exactly.
Shouldn't hold us
Yes.
up any.
Staff is confident that it won't cause a delay of any kind in their timeline, but just out of consideration for the development team, we would want to be sure they were okay committing to that. If, God forbid, contracting took longer than we expected or something with USDOT or something like that. Like if they were ready to install those improvements, but we still weren't under contract, we would need them to just affirm that they would be willing to wait until we give them the thumbs up.
I got you.
Mhm. But again, I expect that we will be under contract probably well before they'll be in a position to start making those improvements. Yeah. So just highlighting, if those amounts were to pan out as we expect, that would help us get to that 4.4 that we need to make a grant request of 22 million. If neither of those, if kind of our worst case scenario pans out where either or both of those funding sources do not come through for whatever reason, whether the timing of the contract or USDOT's traffic safety unit not being able to support us or both, Staff could explore requesting capital improvement funding from the unassigned fund balance, and that would just be part of the annual capital planning model process. And so council would be able to review that request just as you do every other capital improvement program request, and would be able to evaluate if that makes sense for the city's future and trajectory. I will note that that process for FY27 won't start until January, and we'll again hear about this grant, assuming in 2025. We'll hear in August, as far as we know from USDOT so far. So if the grant doesn't come through, we would not even need to pursue that option, but if it does, we'd have several months to potentially explore other local match options before the capital improvement process begins in January. And I will note, even if matching funds do need to come from the city budget, it's worth noting what the federal match means for this potential investment, right? So under this program, every dollar that we invest in city funding gets us $4 in federal funds, right? Whereas a number of our other CIP projects have to be 100% funded by local dollars. So all of that being said, even if council at that future time decided that other projects are the priority for capital improvements, you know, we could reduce our grant request amount if needed to correlate to the amount of funding that we do have at the local level.
But none of this would include, like we talked about, going to the county, going to the state.
Right.
EDC through the county, going to the Abbey to help try to subsidize the total amount here.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, again, I go back to, I think it's worth going for the full amount.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if we did, then you're talking about another $600K that
Mm-hmm.
either through
Sure. Capital
in
fund
kind
loans
or
in
cash
kind.
contributions.
Exactly. Yep. So with all that said, before we dive into discussion, and I know we've talked quite a bit already, but just want to remind y'all of a couple of things. This is a really important opportunity that we have at our fingertips to fund a number of our implementation strategies, not just programming, but capital improvements. And it is a time-limited opportunity. So this is the second to last funding cycle for Safe Streets for All. If we don't get it this time, there's another opportunity to apply next year, but that is the last year of funding that's been received for this program. There's no guarantee it'll be continued in the future, so from our perspective, it's critical to take advantage of this while it lasts. And it offers the chance to complete projects that have been otherwise difficult to fund in a quick and efficient manner. Like I mentioned before, you know, a couple of these projects have been prioritized through the STIP process over and over again. Some of them have not even made it to the point where they've scored highly enough to be included in the STIP or the MTP. They have to compete against other local projects. Only a couple of those get through even to the point where they receive funding. And then, as we've learned over the last several years, just because they're slated to receive funding in the STIP doesn't mean they receive funding on time, are completed along the timelines that we're, you know, kind of expecting at first. So there are drawbacks to that approach. And, you know, we looked at funding several of these same projects through a local transportation bond in the fall. But we saw, you know, some of the drawbacks to that as well. It has to be 100% funded by local dollars. It, you know, requires an increase to local taxes. Safe Streets for All, on the other hand, we have a lot more flexibility to leverage those in-kind contributions that we're already going to be putting forward anyway in terms of staff time, volunteer time. We get that additional $4 for every dollar we invest, and, you know, there's a limited period of performance. So we get 5 years, and we have to complete these projects, and USDOT is committed to helping us do that. So I think all things considered, this is a pretty low-risk, high-reward opportunity for us to think about. And so with that, we're looking to answer any other questions y'all might have, and then looking for your authorization to apply for that grant. We're asking for a grant request in the amount of $22 million. Again, noting that council will have many opportunities if we're awarded as we move forward to be sure that you're all right with the combination of kind of the funding cocktail that we'll use to come up with a local match. and then approve the proposed implementation projects as recommended by our advisory group. So,
Can you go back to the slide that had the priorities, the 4 priorities, and how much it was?
yes, this one?
Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
And did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I did, sorry, I'm trying to write something.
Sure.
Sorry. Can you go through it one more time about, because I'm hung up on the Belmont Abbey.
Okay.
Dollars there, because we're gonna spend 1.9 on betterments that are gonna directly benefit Belmont Abbey.
So, yeah, let me break that
We're
down a
going
little
to-
further. So, of the, I believe it's 6.8, or 8.4, excuse me, that are kind of, geared towards that project package, I believe it's 4.2 is what's going to be required to build out the rest of the Belmont Rail Trail. So 4.2, half of that 8.4 is what's going to be required for the Belmont Rail Trail. I will note, what's included in this grant program is not the portion of the rail trail that actually connects to Belmont Abbey, because that portion is actually getting completed by NCDOT as part of the I-85 widening and the redesign of exit 26. So what we're looking at through this grant is connecting what NCDOT will construct, which is the portion north of 85 down to Wilkinson Boulevard. We're looking at connecting the rest of it from Wilkinson into downtown. The other
And that portion is the
4.2. Yes, that's right.
Wow.
The other 4.2, and that's all, of course, based on existing estimates that have been completed based on the rail trail. I will note that project is in pretty early design, so it's possible that that may change. But based on what we have at the moment, we understand that it would take about 4.2 to construct the rest. The other 4.2, so the other half of those improvements are expected to take place not necessarily north of Wilkinson, but actually on Central Avenue, kind of from North Main all the way down to Keener, and in downtown as well. So some of those improvements are actually, they're not necessarily making improvements at the Abbey, they're making improvements in downtown. One of our task force's biggest recommendations has been, for example, adding more signalization or more awareness and alertness in downtown at some of the crosswalks that can sometimes be blocked by parked vehicles, because it can be very challenging to see folks, especially younger folks, as they're trying to cross the street in downtown with those bulbed out crosswalks, because a lot of cars will park right in front of them, so you don't see someone until they're in the crosswalk. And so, those are included in this as well. So there's 4.2 for the rail trail, 4.2 for...
So are we perhaps getting overly caught up in where the route is to, as opposed
I think
to,
so.
it's not what the route is for,
Right.
but that's sort of like the terminus of this portion.
Yeah.
But most of many of the improvements are improvements.
Well, this is where I was
In
going with this.
downtown. Sure.
Was 1.9 plus 4.2.
Mhm.
The Abbey stated they would give us, they would contribute 500,000, I think it was. So that's, If we do
between
all
the two
these,
sources.
yeah, so that's roughly 10%. I think
Mhm.
we should be getting at least 50% from them for that. I think there's a lot of negotiating we should be doing.
Is that are we talking about the betterments that they've agreed
so
to fund?
just the total dollars we're putting into this trail, I feel like it's kind of getting a little carried away, and we're
Sure.
footing 90% of the bill.
Mhm.
And I think that the Abbey should be putting more money into it.
More money. Okay. I mean, like I said, we're definitely open to chatting with the
Yeah,
Abbey.
I know we already know this guy, I just
Yeah.
want to hammer that home.
Yeah.
That drives me crazy.
For sure. Yeah, I think, we're happy to explore those conversations. But of course, we can't necessarily control whether they're willing to move forward on that or not. And so, I think at this time, yes,
All
we'll look
could be
into
is-
it.
All it could be is potential upside, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We have the baseline, we've got what we've determined as to what we think we'll be able to attribute to this. I
mhm,
think if the Abbey, the county, Gaston County Schools, EDC, the state, if they all contribute, local businesses, that's all upside to this.
Yeah.
right.
So,
And if we're awarded, we can always change the prioritization.
That was gonna be my next question, was, I kinda got lost on how that works.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, just to recap, so the way that these 4 projects were ranked, it was based on how our advisory group members prioritized them. Yeah, so we talked them through, I think there were 7 projects that were still unfunded that were listed in our Vision Zero plan, and so of those 7, we had a pretty lengthy discussion with our advisory group and then asked them to rank, from 1 to 7, those 7 projects. And so these are the 4 that came out in that order. So we're carrying forward, it's the same way we would carry forward planning board recommendation to you, this is the advisory board's recommendation to you.
I think this is a no-brainer. I mean, I want to commend Reagan and your staff and Captain Black and Chief Falls and all you guys on your work here. I think this is tremendous. I mean, a 4-to-1 match is, we can come up with creative ways to provide that, whether it's in cash or a combination. I think that's a no-brainer to me.
So, any other questions? The ask of us was to, there we go, they want us to authorize staff to apply for this fiscal year 25 Safe Streets for All implementation grant funding on the city's behalf. The proposal is in a total amount of $22 million, and to authorize staff to specifically seek funds for the proposed package of implementation projects and activities as recommended. And our choices are to approve as requested, to approve with modifications, or to disapprove. And I sense that perhaps there's a desire to approve with modifications.
I'd like to make a motion to approve as modified to change the 22 million to 25 million. And then as far as the particular project that makes up that delta, leave it to staff's discretion to come back to council at a later point to point for clarification to that.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Alex, seconded by Charlie. All those in favor? Aye.
Great
Any
work.
opposed?
Thank you.
Thank
All right, passed unanimously as modified. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Very good work. Thank you, Captain Black. All right, very good. Well, hopefully that will bear fruit down the road. And Reagan, you said we should know by August whether we get what we get. Yes, thank you. All right, great. So that brings us to item C2, turbidity autonomous monitoring for new development. And our city engineer, Kate Goodman, will present on this topic.
Good evening, City Council and Mayor Pro Tem. Tonight I'm going to present some background on the effectiveness, implementation, and enforcement of potential turbidity monitoring, which would be added to our stormwater ordinance, which we recently revised back in March. So just a first little background on, how this came to be. We have obviously the peninsula, we're surrounded by South Fork, Catawba, and Lake Wiley. We have sedimentation that is a current problem for many things, for recreation, for our public water intake that lies in the Catawba, and obviously we have resident complaints on erosion, sedimentation on a weekly basis. Their turbidity monitoring has been pushed hard by a particular resident and the Catawba River Keepers to monitor sedimentation during construction activities. So this would be a temporary monitoring measure. And just background on erosion control, these are plans and specifications that control sedimentation during construction. Typically what we see is the sediment basins, silt fence, stabilization, seeding, check dams, to help keep sediment on the site during construction. And turbidity falls under erosion control, turbidity monitoring, because this will be limited to during construction It'll be potentially paid for by developers, installed by the developers or their contractors, and monitored, and then reported to us or Gaston County. They're the Erosion Control Permitting Authority. Typically, like I said, you see turbidity monitoring for like long-term water quality monitoring, not so much as a short-term thing, but we'll get into that further in the presentation. So the jurisdictions, like I said, Gaston County is the local delegated erosion control and sedimentation program authority. They review all of our plans, issue the permits, are in charge of violations, stop works, random inspections. So we don't currently review erosion control plans of the city of Belmont. We don't have a erosion control ordinance. We do have the added measures in our stormwater ordinance that we recently added to add some additional buffers, the double rows, silt fence, and some beefed up sediment basins along development that will be adjacent to lakes and rivers, or a high density development like a 20-acre or more graded site. Currently, Gaston County has 3 inspectors for the entire county, and that covers 7 cities, 8 towns, and then obviously areas outside of city limits or town limits and ATJs. That's 364 square miles. And if you look at other municipalities and neighboring counties, they have about 6 to 8 inspectors for that same type of area or amount of towns and population. So, and out of those 3 inspectors, 2 are dedicated to 1 acre and above. That's the state requirement to issue a erosion control permit. So once you disturb 1 acre or more, you need a permit by this, that's the state law. So that's when Gaston County would issue those permits to the larger development. But one of those inspectors is dedicated to under an acre lots, so like single family infill, that kind of thing. So really we only have the 2 inspectors for these larger type developments that we're seeing.
I don't know the appropriate staffing level, but if that's the average around the communities, I just find it a hard time that, we shouldn't be doing the appropriate thing just because the county's understaffed, right? If that's what we're trying to indicate by this. Because I think the whole intent, I know you'll go into the presentation itself, is to do the right thing right now. It's short term because it probably should have been done years ago, but it wasn't. And now we're in the situation we are, where the South Fork River is filling in. Catawba River, as you mentioned, where we take in our water, is also having sediment issues. So I think it's unfortunate that this is the case with the county, but I don't think it changes my mindset in regards to what we need to do moving forward. But I know you're getting into the presentation, but I just wanted to make those comments.
Yeah, I just want to make note, they're the people that enforce it. They're out there, all boots on the ground, inspecting it. There are requirements, which we'll get to later, that for every permit issued over an acre, there are self-inspection requirements, reporting, and record keeping that are required by NCDEQ that they have to do. I can go into that when we get there, but those inspectors do go check sites after large rain events. They do hit the big ones that they know have problems more often than some of the smaller ones. But my opinion is they're short-staffed as well. So that's just.
Do they share that opinion, or are they content with their current staffing?
I don't know.
It depends if we add this to our code or not.
Ultimately, it's up to the contractor and the developer to follow the law. And they can't, obviously, even if they had 50 inspectors, they're not going to be able to cover everything every day. So it is the responsibility after a 1-inch rainfall, they're supposed to inspect within 24 hours or the next business day. So that is part of their financial responsibility to do that, and they could be fined if not, and report any sedimentation downstream as well. They have reporting requirements as well. So it is a low number of inspectors. I feel like there should be more, but they also would like to come in and speak about some of the things they want to add and some of the preventative measures instead of turbidity monitoring. So I spoke with them this week or last week, and they want to come in and do a presentation at the next workshop, to kind of like let you guys more inform you of what they do, maybe suggestions on how we can partner up.
Might have been nice to come in for this
Yeah,
one.
I know, this is like late notice, so,
Yeah,
sorry.
that's all right. It's not your fault.
Well, maybe a little, but we'll get there. So, sediment transport. So, in rivers, what that looks like, it's controlled by the flow, obviously, an upstream sediment supply. Changes in the flow or the amount of sediment can change the transport rate and where the sediment may go. And it does tend to go into coves, which is slower moving water, and you have the channels where, they're higher velocities, so it's going to keep on moving a little bit quicker. Clay soils, obviously what we have here, it's the smallest of all the soil particles. It takes about 2 weeks for a soil particle to settle, whereas sand can settle in a few hours. So you're talking about, suspended particles in the water. We get a lot of rain events, big and small. They're going to be suspended in that water for a very long time and then re-agitated as we get more rain within those 2 weeks. In reservoirs, the sedimentation is actually higher because they impound a large volume of water based on a smaller watershed area. So that's the area that actually drains into Lake Wiley. So it's a little bit higher than if it was not impounded and was not a reservoir, unfortunately. Turbidity, just a little, background definition on that. It's the cloudiness, haziness of the water. It can be caused mostly by large particles. It's a test of clarity and water quality. And like I said, the small particles, they will settle out very slowly, and then they can be regularly re-agitated, especially if the particles are colloidal, and those clay soils are very colloidal. And water temperatures can lead to increased biological growth, like excessive algae, and then algae blooms can contribute to natural sedimentation and vice versa. The warmer temperatures can stimulate more erosion and runoff, which contributes to more turbidity. So turbidity causes the water to be warmer, and warmer weather causes more erosion. So it's just, really complicated ecosystem, obviously, and things like fish and stuff like that can also agitate coves and create more sedimentation and more turbidity. Just tracking the turbidity, large flood events can obviously cause high water levels, and then also create backwater events where water pushes back into coves when the water rises. So you can get sediment moving down the channel and from miles away, and it can push into these coves. So just want to make that very clear so that, if we put monitors in coves for development, it's hard to track the sediment from a particular location. It doesn't necessarily come from that draw. It could come from upstream and settle in that cove. My opinion is that it would be very hard to hold a particular development legally or financially accountable, since there'd be no historical data of turbidity in that area. I really would want a benchmark or a baseline of historic turbidity in the cove before I would say, yeah, you created a 10% or 20% increase in turbidity, and then we should, shut down your construction site or fine you. And Gaston County does agree with that we should be having benchmarks, and if we are going to require these, they need to be installed 6 months to a year in advance so we can get some baseline data. Because if they could be placed, anywhere other than the discharge of the sediment basin, there's a lot of changes in land use happening. These larger developments take years, maybe 5-10 years to build. Land use could be changing in the same watershed or same drainage basin, which could cause additional turbidity and runoff that then they would be responsible for as well. And then we need to talk about the thresholds. So what can we hold as a threshold. We wrote it to like the Lakeview Farms conditional rezoning that they were gonna be required to have 2 turbidity monitors, but we didn't set like a standard. So do we wanna set a percentage of increase, or do we wanna set a number of NTUs? So that's how the turbidity is measured. So I have on here, EPA, they have a threshold of 50 NTUs, that's our maximum. And then Mecklenburg County, their threshold is 25, but it's actually not defined in their enhanced erosion control requirements in their ordinance. And they use the CMAN program. It's like a website that tracks turbidity, and we'll look at that on the next slide. And then the North Carolina Clean Water Act for lakes and reservoirs not designated as trout waters, the turbidity shall not exceed 25 NTUs as well. So we're kind of looking in that range of number. Or if we had a baseline data, we could talk about, maybe they can't increase the turbidity by 10% or 20%, because it may already be in that area of 25 to 50, like naturally. So just kind of would need something to compare it to.
So this is kind of a new concept, right, for us to explore. I mean, it sounds like Lakeview Farms does have a couple of those monitors that I hear you say that
They're required to put 2 in, but it wasn't really specific about.
kind of the standard benchmark or
Right,
baseline.
or like what their maximum could be.
Right.
So,
So
it's hard to say.
I think it was monitoring it. But
Yeah, it's basically just
but there's
monitoring.
no threshold.
Right.
Yeah. And
Good to have.
Well, but it's one of those things, how do you get a baseline without implementing it? At the end of the day, we're never.
Well, if it's
gonna
there for the purpose of developing a baseline, sure.
No.
If it's there just to say, yeah, we've got turbidity monitors. So you're saying Charlotte-Mecklenburg actually has a turbidity plan in place for?
yeah, I mean, they have monitors in place for water quality purposes, like they're funded and installed by Mecklenburg County Stormwater, and they monitor the water quality of coves and streams, just to be aware of the water quality, their turbidity, and then they can also pinpoint projects that they want to do, like a stream restoration project. They're having a lot of scoured banks and sediment, like low pHs and stuff like that. They can go in and identify projects by monitoring, and they can also put monitors in before they do a stream project to see what that delta is. But I think the only projects that I'm aware of in Mecklenburg County that required monitoring was in the Palisades due to some of the Boyd's Cove sedimentation issues, I think. And I have a slide in here of what their enhanced erosion control measure ordinance requires as far as monitoring, and it does not set a threshold. So I've reached out to Mecklenburg County. We haven't heard back yet. Just want to get a little bit more background from them about what they, is there a threshold, or how do they enforce it? I mean, they obviously are the permitting authority, so that's a little bit different than where we were at right now.
Before I lose my mind, you please make if you could make the slides available to us after, regardless of where the discussion leads. You could make the slides available.
Yeah,
And getting tired of it.
of course. I know, that's a lot.
I think they're online.
My hands trying to
They're
process.
in our compass right now.
Hmm?
I think they're in our compass if you go to the website and click on it.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be in there.
Okay.
And we talked about this, just like the impacts of turbidity, wildlife vegetation, obviously, more turbidity in the water means less dissolved oxygen, and less dissolved oxygen means less aquatic wildlife, or the depletion of the wildlife that's already there. We have the public water supply impacts, obviously, increased turbidity causes our water treatment plant to work harder, need more chemicals to clean the water, and we can potentially have boil advisories. And then the reduced recreational use of our lakes and rivers. The more sediments accumulates on the banks, the less navigable the waters are, and the less boats and docks we can have, or people can't get their boats out. So that's, obviously the negatives. So definitely sedimentation is an issue. The issues with the turbidity monitoring is, this is more of a reactive measure. So if we put these on the banks of Catawba or South Fork, and we are alerted, the sediment's already there. So it may have traveled down a creek, a stream to get there, but it's in the river at that point. And so what are we doing at that point? So we have to really come up with a plan, an action plan of how are we gonna get them to fix it quickly, within, 24 hours, to remedy the problem, but obviously the sedimentation's already occurred. So I would like to focus more on proactive measures if we're gonna do something, than trying to let it reach our large bodies of water.
Would you recommend maybe looking at this like on a selective basis, where if you have a project, let's say that's happening primarily on a cove, I mean, to me, that would kind of, and I'm obviously not an expert in that field, but the sedimentation in the cove is gonna be more obvious than out in the
Yes.
channel,
Oh, yes.
right? So if you were to install one of these monitors, say, like you said, 6 months before they turn dirt, you got that baseline established, and then you see, markedly increased levels of turbidity. I mean, I think just the mere existence of the monitor itself should probably hopefully make the developer more responsible and accountable,
Yeah.
try to prevent that in the first place.
Yep.
But maybe something like this is more effective and makes more sense, developments around codes. I'm just kind of,
I don't disagree. I mean, again, we gotta do something, but if you think about, not to call any developer out specifically, but if you think about Pittenger 3, it has 2 codes that touches the actual land itself where proposed potential development could go. I mean, those would be 2 codes where we should have something like this done. And I agree with Jason, they're not gonna go knocking down the trees day one. So you do get a couple of months of that baseline, whether or not you get some large rain events, I guess it could be seasonality, but at least you get something to be able to tell. And I feel like someone could apply the common sense. If they start tearing stuff down and that coat starts filling in or the turbidity increases significantly, I think it's a pretty safe assumption to say where that's coming from. If it's directly touching the property, to like what Jason's saying.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I agree with that. I think, we just have to figure out how to enforce it and how to partner with Gaston County.
is this something you could do on a conditional basis at the application?
Sure, they did that with Del Webb, or they did they did a monitoring system with
Yeah,
Del Webb.
they have 2 monitors.
Yeah,
Yep, they lease a
I wasn't on council.
There's no enforcement action at all either.
What did you say, Jim?
And you wouldn't have approved it, yes, I know.
Hang on, so Mom made a good point about enforcement. There really is none.
The Del Well was put on the fly at the meeting. And they sort of timidly agreed to it and, I think, never went to the county ahead of time to vet it. So the county didn't know about it. And therefore the county, they can speak for themselves, they told me, they have not monitored, enforced it.
So they didn't enforce it, but it would probably be interesting data to receive from them, correct? To see what has the impact been since, a couple of years ago when they put them in? What has it been, a year or 2 now since they put them in? There's your baselines, right? I mean, now you're starting to see that's off the same vein in the South Fork River, which is one of the more critical rivers right here. So why don't we pull the data, ask them for the data, do an audit on it, and see what it tells us?
If there is data.
Oh, Lord. Aren't they like 50 to 60K or something like
They're
that?
dummy monitors.
So it's just sitting out there in the water?
They're about 60,000,
Yeah.
per year, and that's for the monitoring and the equipment, and they lease those monitors, so at the end of the project, those would go back to the manufacturer.
Maybe that's something else that we need to discuss at some point, but that was a portion, that was part of their conditional use. And if they didn't proceed with the conditional use, they're in violation of that conditional use from what it was approved. So we may want to circle back on them to see where that went with those monitors. Because I think the whole intent, because I wasn't on council, Jim, this is what I was going to say, I was in the audience, the intent is to get readings so that we can start measuring this stuff. And if they didn't do that, then, again, they didn't abide by the conditional use for the approval. Conditional.
And so like they have to take all their houses down?
Well, I'm not saying that, but potential fines could probably be implemented into that, but I mean, leave that up to.
Yeah, but there was no threshold set again, so the way it's written, and the way it's written in the Lakeview Farms is, they're supposed to install the monitors and alert us if they go off, but that, it's like, what is the threshold that triggers it, and what's the threshold that we're gonna hold them accountable for what type of increase?
But
So
that was never discussed. I mean, because it was part of the conditions of when.
Well, I think that if you ask the resident who's the driving force behind this, he has said repeatedly, and correct me if I'm wrong, he's not concerned about enforcement. Like, why are we getting all caught up with enforcement? He wants the information.
Yeah,
So I don't think that would really, I think that was one of the hangups was,
Yeah.
but you can't really enforce it.
right,
And that continues to be one of mine.
Well, I get that, Jim, but
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that the intent, I remember from that meeting, the intent was that we can start accumulating data to create baselines, but if they didn't do it, it was part of the condition that they were supposed to do, right? So,
Well, you'd have to go back and look at the conditions and see what, there's monitors that have been installed, is that correct?
that's correct, there's two.
All right.
Yep.
So are there any local examples where these things exist and there actually is enforcement? That you know of?
Yes.
Yeah,
We're gonna get to that.
okay, so,
So, yes, Mecklenburg County, they did require them for, like I said, the Palisades. They do have those monitors throughout, the banks, many rivers in Charlotte, but they usually primarily for long-term water quality monitoring. Their ordinance isn't specific on the threshold, so I don't know how they're enforcing it, so that's the other part I need to follow up with, that I've contacted, the contact that Neil has given me many times over the past month, and I have not heard back from that person.
How about gas? Do you have any data on whether there's any gas in Canton?
They do not. Lowell actually, and I only heard this third hand, so, I'm trying to get more information on this situation, but I guess Lowell required some sort of turbidity monitoring in a recent conditional rezoning, and then they were gonna hold the developer responsible for any delta between an upstream monitor and a downstream monitor. But then they actually revised the rezoning to take it out for whatever reason they felt like was putting them in some sort of legal jeopardy. So I'm trying to get some more background on that, but at this time, no.
So we've got two out there, and there's no assigned threshold. They were just supposed to alert us when they went off.
Yeah, that's all.
Is there a default setting on those things? It goes off at a certain number if you don't?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Who was supposed to be alerted?
That's what we don't know.
and if they miss the alert, it's like, oops.
I think a third-party inspection company that they hired to do their self-inspection, record keeping and reporting, which is also a current requirement by Gaston County and North Carolina DEQ. So, I did talk to Pulte, and they are keeping records, but we haven't seen any of it. So, but we're also not the permit authority, so I think it just needs to be more detailed. So, the other thing is with turbidity monitoring, this would be hard to implement in like large urban projects that are not extreme adjacent, and those can often create just as much sediment or runoff, and then also go into a closed pipe system, settle, and then another large storm event will come through and push that downstream. So you'll see the turbidity in the lakes and rivers much longer after a large rain event or multiple rain events. So it's, we can hold the lake adjacent, river adjacent properties to monitoring, but we also have large infill developments too. And then we also have smaller infill projects that are less than an acre that don't trigger a lot of the erosion control measures and a state permit. But they're honestly the highest cause for erosion complaints that we get around the city. And if you take all those little less than 1 acre lot developments and add them all up, it's just as much sediment. And I have some pictures and videos I can show you after this.
Oh, we've seen them.
You've seen them. And they go on and they go on, and it's like, I know it's not as long as a large development, but it can last over a year. And and it can really affect dense neighborhoods with historic homes that are pretty close together, and it's hard for us to go into a built-out environment and then remedy those problems. So thinking about better proactive measures instead of the reactive monitoring, I would love to partner with Gaston County to try to come up with better ways we can try to keep sediment on sites in the infill projects too. This is just a clip, it's a lot, but it's just, again, like I said, the MTD requirements for self-inspection. So some of that stuff is, after a 1-inch rainfall, they have to inspect within 24 hours of the next business day, and they have to inspect the site every 7 calendar days, and after every phase of grading. So this is just part of the record keeping and reporting and self-inspection that any permit over an acre in the state of North Carolina is requiring. So there are requirements, monitoring requirements. They're not turbidity monitors, but they are monitoring their site by either their own contractor, developer, or third-party inspection company.
So you said that applied to over an acre?
Over an acre in the whole state of North Carolina. And this goes into the set of construction documents, every set of plans that has more than 1 acre disturbed. And I can send you a copy of this if you like, or a link. But this is Mecklenburg County's enhanced erosion control requirements. This is in their ordinance, and it applies mostly to the Catawba River banks and Lake Wiley. And this doesn't apply to, like, Huntersville has their own erosion control program, so does Waxhaw and a few other small cities. So it doesn't necessarily apply to all of Mecklenburg County, but for the most part, all the banks in the Catawba are under this threshold for enhanced erosion control requirements. So basically it says, if they disturb more than 10 acres of the drainage area to a basin is more than 10 acres, a turbidity measurement may be required at the discretion of the jurisdictional authority to measure the basin effluent. So what they want to do is they want to put one at the basin outfall, so directly below their sediment basin outfall pipe. Upstream of the discharge point such clean water based on conditions, and then downstream at the cove or wherever that may outfall to, and then they have to log the results. But that's it, like they don't specify a threshold either. So that's kind of.
So all right, let's say something triggers an alert, what then? Like what happened? So the results have to be logged, so even in Mecklenburg County, the results have to be logged in the inspection reports. And
I'm with you. I mean, what good's the information if there's no enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, they have inspectors, they have more inspectors, and they probably have better reaction time. And they'll contact the contractor and let them know that it's going on, and they'll give them 24 hours to make repairs. I mean, that's usually going to happen after a large storm event, so they're aware that blowouts happen during those events, 1 inch or larger.
You're monitoring to ensure that it gets repaired so that it could become a continuous problem.
Yeah.
And then also particularly with the enforcement, if you implement various different fines, it incentivizes the developers to to try to be preventative. I mean, we're saying it's reactive, but I don't think it's reactive. We're trying to create a habit for the developers to be proactive when it comes to this type of erosion control. Again, part of the monitors that were installed by Del Webb would have helped us to understand some of the data as it pertains to this, right?
If there's no penalty,
Yeah.
what's the point?
Well, I think that's the part we have to get to, is what would the penalty be?
I agree wholeheartedly with that position, but I think it sounds like there's a lot of subjectivity to turbidity measurements, and it's extremely difficult, if not close to impossible, to quantify it and where it comes from.
and that would be yes.
And that all.
I'm not an engineer, obviously, but if you were to impose a penalty and they didn't want to pay it, they challenged it, how, it sounds as though
That might be way low
Yeah, like how would you, it seems like there's a huge proximate causation issue with any attempt to enforce any of this.
It may just be introducing more potential litigation
Mhm.
for us that, and I could see that being for arbitration as a minimum, right?
Yeah.
But the way I think about it, again, I keep going back to this, and I'm not trying to be a jerk about this, but if you go to Del Webb, let's say it's the same vein, it's the South Fork River, and you have the two miners in those codes. You get a couple years of data. I mean, it's the same river, right? You look at that and determine a trend or what the baseline should be, and then you make the next developer do it, and then if it's abnormal to what the previous trend was, I feel like you have grounds there. And I'm not an engineer. I mean, that's just the way I think about it, and that's how it was presented when Neil and the folks came
Yeah.
forward.
That seems like a sensible plan. I mean, I suppose you could try, you could sort of, do sort of a pilot project and have fines, have some repercussions, for violating whatever thresholds that staff feels like, we should set once you get that baseline determined, but, there's gotta be an enforcement, otherwise they're like, oh yeah, that's required, but they don't enforce it.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, I was also say that it'd be hard to like compare a code to another code, I mean, I would think the percentage, your baseline and then your increase, if we can figure out a good delta or percentage that they're allowed to, like a buffer, they're gonna have a little bit of sedimentation.
Sure.
I don't know that you would then wanna go like compare the NTUs to another code.
Yeah, it would be specific to that one.
But this is the Mecklenburg County system, it's called CMAN. So if we did do these monitors, the particular resident wanted to link these monitors to this system, which is an online platform website that you could check the data in real time. And that would be really awesome if we did do that. There'd be some coordination required, and I mean, ideally, those monitors would be in the ground long term. Post construction for our own information and to share with the Colorado River Keeper and Gaston County to monitor turbidity in the rivers. So, those things, they test turbidity and a few other parameters. So it's a good indicator of long-term changes in the water quality and short-term changes too. So they monitor 24 hours a day and post to that website. And this is kind of what that website looks like. This is a code. This is Boyd's code actually. And this is the data from the past month. You can see I pulled a couple rainfall events from NOAA. On the 24th of April, there was a 0.15-inch rainfall. And you can see it right there. It did spike the turbidity above 15 NTUs, so that's a really small rain event. It might have been really intense, but it did get your spike in turbidity. And then we had a 2.5-inch rainfall a couple days ago, a week ago, and you can tell no turbidity increases happened on May 12th. So it's very fluctuates.
It's not exactly consistent.
No, very not. No.
Well, they could have repaired like a silk fence or something in the last 2 days as well.
Yeah. And then those other green dots to the north, those are other monitors, not necessarily where construction's happening, they just have these in codes for their own monitoring.
Is that a river district maybe?
Yeah, I think so. Some of the, river district's being developed right now.
Yeah.
Then, you have the enforcement, like the goal would be to be notified when it exceeded the allowed threshold. Like I said, Met County didn't set a threshold. I would like to call Gaston County and notify them so they could go inspect the area. The alternative to that would be we could have our own erosion control program, have our own inspectors, and I have another slide about that. But Gaston County has the power to issue a notice of violation, a stop work, or a fine based on the offense or if it was repeated or unresolved. But right now, since they don't require these as part of the permit, they have not agreed to help participate in this effort, and they wrote into the interlocal agreement that they will not enforce additional measures for stormwater or erosion control as of right now. Alternative solutions, an example that was proposed, was graph sampling. So this would be, taking a sample at the cove or the outfall and then sending it to a lab, which in my opinion would just create more time and to see what that turbidity may be, and then, then you're reacting even slower to the problem. Long-term water quality monitoring, we talked a little about this already. That would be keeping these monitors in long-term for Gaston County or the Catawba River Keepers to establish benchmarks and base data. So that might be something they would want to pay for if these developers put them in, and they could take over the equipment and the monitoring. I do think that would be a good idea long-term. And then erosion control program, we could develop our own local ordinance. We could hire a plan reviewer and an inspector, and we could issue our own permits. That'd be an option. And then we could just require these monitors on a per project basis on conditional rezonings. That's what we're kind of doing now. So anything above 50 lots would have to go through conditional rezoning, and we could require those during that time. I think we would need to iron out more specifics on thresholds though on the next one we do. Pulte 2 and 3 already submitted a sketch plan, so they would not be subject to ordinance changes if we adopted them.
But they could be subject to any type of conditional, because it is a conditional zone.
And
I believe that's right, is that correct?
And then, like I said, Lakeview Farms agreed to put 2 monitors in, but then, most of the lakefront property is gonna be built out at that point after those developments, so, the focus will then be on other infill, I think. And then just focus on preventative measures, like I said, to increase the best management practices and improve those and strategize with Gaston County to help sediment runoff from large and small projects that are within the city, not necessarily on stream banks or river banks.
I think it's one thing to be able to monitor projects, like you said, that are adjacent to a large body of water, with river or lake, but when you talk about infill projects, being able to assign liability there, that's gets even more challenging.
Yeah. This is just a little bit about, most of this came from the state, on planning for your own local erosion control program. They have a state model similar to like our watershed ordinance. You would take that, maybe revise it, adopt it, have it reviewed by land quality and maybe an attorney, and then you want to create a program, so you're going to need a budget, equipment, vehicles, certifications, personnel, adopt the ordinance, petition the Sedimentation Commission Council for local delegation and ordinance approval, and then implement said ordinance, and then, you may need to revise the Gaston County interlocal at that point, if that's something that we're interested in doing to beef up erosion control restrictions in our city. And that's about it. We do have a few pictures from infill sedimentation, if you're interested in seeing how terrible that is, but sounds like you already know about that.
Yeah, we've seen a few.
Throw one up there.
This is Woodrow. You can just kind of scroll through quickly. But it's pretty bad. This is like a half-acre lot creating all this erosion on their neighbor's land. So that's Poplar Street.
Poplar Street.
Yeah. So again, less than half-acre lot. They cleared the site. And that's
So
what
that
it
one
was.
would not be subject even to self-inspection, right? It's because it's
No,
under.
but they do have to have, there is an under an acre erosion control, like informal permitting process that Gaston County has, so they are required to put like 7-foot fence in, that kind of silt fence. But those blow out, and then the site was, kind of, it was cleared and then left vacant for a long time, so there's no one monitoring it, and a lot of complaints, and, you add all those problems up, and you send it down a pipe, and it sits there, and it washes down, and it gets to the river, so, I guess, summarize, there's just a lot of flux and unknowns with the monitoring, I think we're gonna do it, we need to figure out enforcement, and then, the threshold, we wanna allot, and we need to write that into, especially these conditional rezonings, to establish a better way to control it and regulate it. And then I'd like to work more with Gaston County on trying to figure out some better preventative measures.
So any questions, any other questions for Kate?
So you said they're planning to come to the next workshop, so,
They would like to, maybe it'll be,
Won't be
the June one got moved up into July.
Oh, yeah, it'll have to be July.
Yeah.
We're not,
I think I'd be hard pressed to give any kind of direction until we hear from the county, and their position on it.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I think, again, it might be prudent to reach out to the River Keepers. They've been a good partner to the city of Belmont and do a lot for local communities to get their input on it as well. Obviously, we know the Lake Wiley Commissioners' opinion on the matter, right, from Neil and the team, but, I still think it's something worth going forward on. I would ask my other colleagues to join in and ask staff to looking into where we are with the Del Webb's monitoring systems. That is part of their conditional approval, and I think that's something, that data is something that was intended at the time when it was approved for us to be able to look at to create baselines and trends. So, I don't know, do I have support
I
for
do
on that?
support
Because
that.
that was part of their
Part of the
approval.
approval, yeah.
I think it's fine to see what the, what they have, what the actual language of the condition
yeah,
is.
that's what I would like to know, what it actually says.
So there's, is there any action item, Miles, or is this just more? I think, if Gaston County wants to come, I think that would be interesting. I think it would allow us to ask some questions. We hear what they say and what they are and what they aren't going to do, but I think it would be helpful to have some direct interaction with them. I remember there was one lady that was back there and stood up and said something at some meeting back in '21 that they weren't gonna do anything or something like that. But I think it would be helpful. I appreciate the, I appreciate what we're trying to do here, but I'm just concerned about the enforcement, and even if enforcement was attempted, whether if the applicant or the developer were to contest it, whether it would be something that would hold up
Yeah, in court, yeah.
in court. I don't know whether the information, for the sake of, like Jason said, it would be useful to have a lot of this information. I don't know whether that in and of itself is a sufficient goal. It's just the enforcement leaves a lot of to be desired.
It may be prudent to reach out to Mecklenburg County as well, to understand their programs.
There was a guy that used to come with Neil.
Yeah, maybe there's another contact we could reach out to,
Rusty,
because I don't know this contact that Neil's referring to, but maybe we look at the directory and see if there's someone else we can talk to, because obviously they have a program in place and they're enforcing it in some instances. So instead of reinventing the wheel, maybe we go and look and see what their program is, or their.
Yeah,
It sounds like they haven't set thresholds, though, you said, all right?
I mean, the ordinance doesn't specify, so I need to get more information.
So-
Olivia, that's the contact Neil gave me. Rusty Roselle actually passed away last week.
Oh,
Unexpectedly.
Really?
So, Rusty Roselle.
Really?
Yeah. So, they may be, busy
Understood.
management, sorting that out. So, yeah, I'll get with Mecklenburg County and clarify that.
So, obviously no final determination is going to be made here today, but I did notice in the staff report, the staff recommendation was not to require it. Is that your professional professional opinion.
Yes.
And could you summarize the basis for that? I mean, I know you have
It's
all.
mainly the enforcement. I mean, it's hard to say where the sediment came from, number one. We have a lot of changes in land use, a lot of development, which drains to these coves, so it's hard to pin that on one developer. We're not the permitting authority, so how do we enforce it? How do we find them? And if we could get Gaston County to partner with us and they had more staff, I think that would be very much feasible. Unfortunately, they don't. So, and, like I said, once it's in the river, it's in the river, and then we're, backtracking to remedy the problem after the fact. So I do think some better proactive measures and could be in place on sites other than silt fence and the way a lot of people just slap silt fence in. It has too many acres draining to it, it's not designed or installed properly. There's things that can be done to help keep sediment on the site. I think monitoring is great for like long-term water quality purposes, and if we were to get them installed, I think we should have them remain there and have them linked to some sort of system that either the Copper River Keepers or Gaston County can monitor long-term. I just don't think, the city of Belmont doesn't have that staff, and unless we want to take the local erosion control program and get that started, I just don't think we should get involved in enforcement since we're not the permitting authority.
I like your line of thinking of being more proactive because they're so problematic on the other end to try to enforce. Maybe between now and the time they do come, if we could have maybe some ideas of some of those additional proactive measures on top of like silt fencing and some of the other things you mentioned, but what are some additional ways that we can be proactive and maybe incentivize developers to be proactive and work with the county to sort of have a unified message, therefore.
Yes. It's always better to use the carrot instead of the stick. Right? Yes.
Yeah.
So I think is that, Miles, I think we are interested in having the county come, hopefully in July if it works out. Assuming, but if they are to come, I would also want, I think it's fair to ask Riverkeeper to come and ask, a representative from the Lake Wiley Marine Commission. Let's hear, the saga has continued for quite a while, but I think it would be most productive for our decisions if everyone is here and can speak to it instead of, the county said this and Neil said that, but they're not here. So everyone can speak to themselves, we can hear it, and we can decide whether this is something we want to do or whether we want to go through some alternatives.
And honestly, if we can get a representative from Charlotte Neck or
Yes,
County as well,
Yes.
I think that would be helpful. And again, I would please ask if we could get that information from Del Webb before that meeting as well, in regards to if they have been keeping track of these monitors that they've installed, because I think that's prudent to this conversation.
Yeah. There was a monitor further north of Belmont on Lake Charlotte, on the Charlotte shore, and they got, I want to say like 2 inches, not a lot, it was like an inch and a half of rain or something, and they spit out like 500 and something NTUs of turbidity. So I just want you to also be aware that the sediment is coming from other locations that we have no control over. It can come all the way from the mountains, and it can come here and settle because we've, dammed this river up and created a reservoir, so it's hard to track that. And like Helene, you saw the sediment changes there, so when we have those, natural disaster type events, you're gonna see sediment and there's no way to stop it. And it's gonna come from other places other than our banks, but yeah, we can do our part and control the sediment off our shore.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your work. Appreciate it.
All right. Let's see. Item C3, quarterly finance update. Jared. Thank you for your patience. I'm sure you enjoyed hearing about
I sure did.
grant funding and turbidity.
I sure did. Hope everyone's doing well this evening.
You need to tell the council up in Hickory that they need to install some stuff up there in the Catawba River Basin.
Fair enough. All right, so we'll just jump right in here. This is through the third quarter, which would be March 31st, 2025. We'll start with revenue, general fund revenue, tax, ad valorem tax revenue has come in 13% higher than anticipated. Peak months of collections have already passed, remember that's during the winter time, so we'll see these slow down dramatically over the next quarter, but it has come in strong. Intergovernmental revenue is coming in as anticipated. That includes sales tax, utility franchise tax, alcohol tax, and PAL bill. And then other revenue includes charges for sanitation, fund balance appropriations, permits and fees, and investment earnings. All of those are coming in as anticipated. Total fund balance appropriations to date total $825,000, $832. And then that transfer from ARPA is the budget amendment that we did at the beginning of the year to obligate and spend down the rest of that American Rescue Plan dollars. In the water sewer fund, charges for services are coming in as expected as percentage of the year. Non-recurring revenue is the general fund paying back the 2022 paving loan from the water and sewer fund. Other operating revenue includes interest on investments, penalties, system development fees, and grants, and that is over as a percentage of the year due to higher than anticipated system development fees. And stormwater is coming in as expected. Any questions on revenue? Okay. Always like to highlight our local option sales tax. When I prepared these slides, the March figures were not yet available, but I was able to locate on the NCDOR their letter. So our March sales tax distribution was $460,000, and that brings our total collected to just over $4.5 million. So rather than the average of $213,000 needed to meet expectation for the year, we actually only need $130,000 over the next 3 months of the fiscal year. Currently averaging a little bit over $500,000 per month. So we're doing well on the sales tax.
This seems to be a pretty nice trend we've seen over the past 3 years, right? I mean, sales tax revenue continues to outperform our expectations from initial budgeting.
From a
Even when
budgetary-
we thought the economy in some of the lower kind of pieces, 2 years ago or so.
Sure. I would caution that, you do see swings on this. So for example, the most recent one was $460,000. The month prior was over $560,000. So there is some fluctuation, and it is volatile. But I guess to answer your question, Alex, is from a budgetary perspective, yes, we have collected more than what we've budgeted.
Which is good, because some of our projections for next year sort of, assume that's going to continue to be the case.
Call it out.
Cross your fingers, yeah. Any questions on sales tax? Okay. Next, we'll look at general fund expenditures. Most of our general fund department expenditures are in line as a percentage of the year. The city attorney and sanitation, those are billed in a month in arrears, so that's why you're seeing a little bit of a lag there as far as the expense. And then debt service, we do have several debt service payments that are going to occur over the fourth quarter, including a $780,000 principal payment for the rec center. So all in all, everything is trending in the right direction. Any specific questions on the general fund?
Just to answer.
Okay.
How much do we owe on the rec center?
I'd have to pull the data, but we've only paid 2 principal payments so far. Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
got you.
Principal's once per year, interest twice per year.
Okay, got you.
Water and sewer fund expenditures, most water sewer fund expenditures are in line as a percentage of the year. Debt service is on track. We've got payments for the AMI infrastructure project, USDA for this building, and state revolving loan payments for sewer rehab project. Those will all be expensed in the fourth quarter. Any specific questions on the water sewer fund? And lastly, stormwater expenditures, again, in line as a percentage of the year. Everything's trending in the right direction there. Questions on stormwater?
snapshot of looking at this point in time, last year as compared to this year. You will notice a slight variance in the prior year in the general fund, and that is mostly due to that large $1.1 million transfer from ARPA that we've not recognized yet. That will be a transfer done at the end of the year. To note, there's $491,000 that will be transferred to the water sewer fund and $22,000 to the stormwater fund, but very similar place as last year. And then on the expenditures, very similar conditions when comparing to the prior year.
So the expenditures between 24 and 25, that's, there's no variance there, right?
As far as a percentage, so if you look at the percentage, general fund budget remaining in 2024, there was 30%. This year, there's 23%.
Okay.
29% for water sewer, 26. So they're within reasonable expectation. We're basically in a similar spot as last year. It's just for comparative metrics. A lot of things can change that, right? You could have backloaded capital expenditures that could throw some of these numbers off. I just look at it as a comparison, and if I see anything drastic, then I'll investigate.
But the budgeted expense number, the dollar amount should not change from one year to the next?
They are. Oh, good catch. I must not have updated those numbers on this slide. They're not the same.
Okay.
That would be one in the 10 million chance there. No, this slide just must not have gotten updated.
Okay.
And that's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you, Jared. Any other questions?
Thank you, Jared.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Well,
That's all on the agenda. There's one thing I just want to make sure everyone is good for. We are coming up on the city manager's annual evaluation and review. If you recall, last year we had a special meeting before the council meeting. If we were to do that on June 2nd, would everyone be available at 5 o'clock to do that?
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
About a second.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You said 5 o'clock?
5 o'clock. So we'll do that in closed session at 5, and then we'll have a regular meeting at 6.
Upstairs?
Yes. Parks, was there anything else on that? All right, if there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made by Alex, seconded by Jason. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
All this stuff.